My name is Jennifer Larios. I'm an archaeologist and I am studying for a PhD in anthropology at the University of Michigan. I work in the Valley of Oaxaca, which is in southern Mexico. I work at a site named Jaliesa. So from around 200 to around 800 in the Common Era, the Valley of Oaxaca, which is the map here, was occupied by the Zapotec state. So as you can see in the map, the Valley of Oaxaca is a Y-shaped valley with three branches. And in each of the branches, there was a regional capital during the time of the Zapotec state. So if we think about it in modern terms, the Zapotec state would have been like a country, and then Monte Alban, which is kind of in the center of the valley, would have been like the country's capital, kind of like how we have Washington, D.C. in the U.S., and then the regional capitals would have been like state capitals. So I work at what would have been the southern regional capital. So my research focuses on how commoners at Jaliesa were affected by the abandonment of Monte Alban and the collapse of the Zapotec state. So if we go back to our modern day analogy, our government leaders are the ones who set the rules in a country that people have to follow. So imagine if our government lost power, how would that affect us? So Monte Alban and the Valley of Oaxaca have been the focus of archaeological studies for over 100 years. However, most of that research has focused on the upper classes of Zapotec society. The Zapotec upper classes lived in palaces that looked like this. So this picture is of a palace that is in one of Monte Alban's neighborhoods. The neighborhood's name is Atzompa. And so the stone walls that you see here are what we call the foundations of a house. So people would have placed adobe bricks on top of these walls, and then on top of the adobe walls, they would have placed the roof of the house. So one of the reasons why we know a lot about the upper classes is because palaces and temples, like the ones that you saw in the last two slides, are really hard to miss. So over time, buildings get covered in dirt and vegetation, and they form a mound. So the mound is here in this picture, and that's an example of what temples and palaces look like before they get excavated. So the lower classes or common people like you or me, they lived in really small houses. Sometimes these houses would also turn into small mounds, but at Jaliesa, where I work, there's only one mound. So then how do we find the houses of common people? Well, to start, we know that the upper classes usually lived at the top of hills. So the hill that you see in the back is called Cerro Tecolote, right here. And this is where people lived at Jaliesa after the Zapotec state collapsed. The only mound here is at the top of the hill. So if we know that the upper classes lived at the top of hills and that there are no mounds, how did I know where to excavate? Survey. So survey is when archaeologists walk around to see if there are any artifacts on the ground or if there are any changes made to the landscape. So the most common types of artifacts that we see are pottery vessels and stone tools. So the types of pottery and stone tools that we find can be clues as to what kinds of activities people were doing or what kind of people were living there. So for example, upper classes tend to have access to nicer pottery. Not always, but there is a pattern sometimes. So it's kind of like when people have china or crystal dishes that they use to eat for special occasions. Luckily for me, other archaeologists had surveyed Jaliesa, so I just had to go to places where they surveyed to see if there were any artifacts there. And so here are two pictures that I took when I was looking for a house to excavate. Can you find the artifacts? Pause the video to see if you can find any pottery. And then on the next slide, I'll show you where some of the pottery is. So where the arrows are pointing, that's just where some of the pottery is. So there's gray pottery and orange pottery, and then there's also a little bit of brown pottery here. And that's just, the arrows are pointing just to some of it, not all. So during survey, we also look for clues that tell us that the landscape has been changed. So we know what nature looks like. So if we see rocks in a line like here, then that's a sign that people did something there. So if we see bricks like here in this picture, that's also another clue. So the rocks that I've circled are, they're like bricks. And so people modified them and worked and changed them so that they could use them as foundations of a house. And so the rocks in the squares and the bricks in the squares, those are probably the ones that were in their original place, and then the ones that are circled are the ones that move down. So the arrows are pointing the direction in which they've moved over time. And here's a huge piece of evidence that tells us that the place where this is at was a house. So this is a metate, or a grinding stone. And it's primarily used to grind corn. People still use these today in Oaxaca and throughout Mexico and Central America. And so they're used to grind corn to turn it into masa, or the dough that is used to make tortillas. So the little stone next to it is it's called a mano, and that's the stone that people would have used to grind the corn over the metate. So from my own survey at Jaliesa, I started to notice steps connected to terraces, like the ones that you see here. So here are the walls that make up the steps. And so from excavations at other sites in the Valley of Oaxaca, we know that when people lived on hills, they flattened areas on the slopes of the hills to build their houses. So whenever I would see these steps, I would climb them, and they would lead me to a terrace. And in these terraces, we would find all kinds of artifacts on the ground. Here are the steps that I showed you on the last slide, and then this is the terrace. So I decided to excavate at one of these terraces to see if we could find a commoner house. And we did. So on the left is the foundation of a house that we excavated. Very little is left of the foundations of this house. As you can see, it's not complete. But the photo on the right gives you kind of an idea of what these houses would have looked like. This picture in particular is from a modern-day adobe house in the Oaxaca highlands. And so as you can see, people would place the adobe bricks over the foundations. Sometimes if they didn't have the time or the resources to make adobe bricks, they would tie sticks together and then cover them with a mix of mud or clay, which is known as wattle and daub. So that's how we found commoner houses.